Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
It's Jeremy from Saturn. Just got back.
Yeah, you just got back.
Yep.
We just experienced a demo called Lone Echo. It's a new title being announced for the Oculus Touch. But before we give you our impressions, let's jump to an interview where the developers can better explain what the game concept is, their unique mechanic, and you can watch Jeremy play it a little bit, and then we'll give you our impressions. So I'm joined now by Nate from Ready at Dawn, and tell me a little bit about Lone Echo. First, what's the game about?
So Lone Echo is a first-person space exploration game. So it's set in kind of a plausible future, kind of in the mining operations in the rings of Saturn. And the player is kind of this robotic character that's sort of on the cusp of sentience. So you're accompanied by another human protagonist in the world, Olivia Rhodes, who's the commander of this mining operation. And so the game's about just like discovery and exploration and kind of problem solving in this really compelling kind of open setting.
With a narrative-driven single-player experience. You said exploration's a big part of the game, and the way in which you navigate through the world is something I've never experienced before in VR. You have full body presence, and you're letting people grab onto everything. How did you guys come upon that, and can you describe that mechanic?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the whole game was kind of informed by that mechanic. It's like VR is such a new kind of space. We really want to see what is a really compelling immersive experience for the players, and we really wanted to have players be able to move around. So not teleporting, not kind of locked in place, like being able to have full control over their own body. And so we realized, like looking at like footage of ISS, it's like astronauts like move with their hands, and we have this great hardware that has one-to-one tracking of your hands and your head. And so that in of itself, that we had a little early tech demo showing how the players could move around full locomotion with their own body, and we kind of built the game around that premise.
You're almost crawling around the world. I mean, we've seen space games before where you have full degrees of freedom, real physics, and you have thrusters in this game, but the primary system seems to be to grab and pull and then throw yourself around space.
Yeah, that was something that it was really a light bulb went off when we saw that VR can have comfort issues, but when you have like one-to-one presence with your head and your hands, and you're moving with your hands, like your brain is completely fooled. So you're able to do these really active, aggressive motions, and like people, even with like, sensitive issues to motion, are pretty comfortable. So it was something that we realized that it was kind of the secret sauce for the game, where you could have lots of motion, lots of freedom, lots of exploration, but still a good comfort level.
And that mechanic works best, as we can see, in zero-G. In a zero-G environment, there's no gravity, so you just let physics play as it would in the real world. How big of a world are you then able to explore within your story?
So we're not talking about too much of that right now, but from what you saw in the demo, there's actually a pretty substantial area beyond that where you can kind of explore of your own volition. So there is a narrative through line, there are things you're supposed to accomplish, but you don't have to do it in a linear fashion. And there's a lot of emergent content kind of within that space that you can just kind of play around with and enjoy yourself in.
So the demo I played, you're solving this puzzle essentially, working as a robot on the exterior of a ship. Are you thinking most of that activity is confined to that kind of the cargo hold area?
Oh, it's a decent area. It's this mining operation kind of set in the rings of Saturn. So there's a very large space station, which you just saw a little glimpse of the exterior. You can fully explore the interior of that space station, and there's a bunch of dig sites, these rocks where they're kind of excavating water ice and helium-3. So each of these facilities you can kind of explore at your own pace.
How do you fast travel then between the areas?
So you can just use your hands. So you can just take a leap of faith and kind of fling yourself from area to area. But one vehicle you saw in the demo that he's actually, he's not on now, but there's these Fury modules, these transports where you can use them to get more efficiently around the space. But really, it's up to you. You can kind of just fling yourself and leave yourself, in the hands of physics.
So you can actually ride vehicles, and they have acceleration. And as I was playing it, I had to hold on because in acceleration, you could fling off the vehicle if you're not.
So the interesting thing is it kind of honors physics for the most part, where when you're matching velocity with the vehicle, you could clamber over it, you can crawl just like you're on a stationary platform, you could let go and you'll be moving kind of parallel with it. But the robotic voice will kind of warn you where it's about to kick in kind of the retro thrusters, because as soon as that fires, if you're not holding on to that vehicle, it'll shoot past, and at very high velocities you can actually like crush yourself and die.
No seatbelts in space.
No seatbelts in space.
Now, I also notice in your representation of your body and your hands specifically, you're using a lot of the Oculus Touch in terms of what kind of poses and gestures, even each individual finger on top of the thumbstick or the buttons. Do those come into play in the gameplay?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one really cool thing about VR is like you're no longer really beholden to the controller itself. So there's a lot of interactions that you can do just by touching and grabbing things in the virtual world. Like your laser cutter tool, you actually hit a button on your virtual character on his wrist. It's not actually a controller button. So it really lets you have a lot more kind of creative interactions in the world that are also like super kind of emergent with your own kind of locomotion and your own hands.
How to deal then with collision models? Because you have a tactile world, and the game mechanic is meant on tactile, being able to contact that world. What happens when you get through, or your body doesn't, the IK doesn't exactly match? What happens then?
Well, we put a lot of effort into kind of tracking and conforming to arbitrary collision. You'll see as he's grasping onto things, his hand actually conforms to arbitrary surfaces. So your hand will sort of like contour over the object, and so it's something it's super emergent. People are just fascinated watching their own kind of virtual robot hands kind of grasp these arbitrary shapes.
And that feels comfortable even though your real hands aren't exactly in those contour poses.
Yeah, it seems like it's close enough that your intention of your brain and what your character is doing, we put a lot of effort into trying to kind of best approximate what that should be. And so for the most part, I think it feels really natural. And I think we're probably one of the few titles that you can actually see your whole body. So you have a really strong sense of presence, even though you're this kind of far future kind of robot. But you can really look down, see yourself, and it feels like your hands are doing what they should be from what your brain is telling them to do.
You've been in development for about a year now. Is that most of that in terms of figuring out that locomotion mechanic, and now is it more about making the story and making the environments? Where are your development efforts focused?
A lot of those things go in parallel. I mean, there's a lot of different kind of departments. So you have like a narrative team and a design team kind of working on kind of the narrative through line and that kind of thing. And then you have like systems and gameplay that are really working on just like player presence and really kind of capturing all those little like nuances that make you feel like you're really that character in that place. So they kind of all happen concurrently.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to playing the full game. It's a wonderful, unique experience.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's great to meet you.
You too.
All right, back from Saturn, Jeremy.
Yeah, what'd you think?
Oh my goodness. If you told me that was a game that mechanic would have worked in VR
Right.
a week ago, I would not have believed I would have walked out of that demo feeling comfortable.
Me too, man. And I think I'm even a little more susceptible to motion sickness than you are. So the way that you move around in this game is you grab the surfaces and then you're in complete zero G. And you pull and you let go and you just drift through space until you can grab something else. You also have these thrusters on your wrists, which you can activate to nudge yourself in different directions. It's all heavily physics-based. There's not any like serious acceleration or deceleration. It all feels very, very natural. I was amazed that I didn't throw up from this game. Actually, I don't feel motion sick at all.
Now, we've seen space-based first-person VR experience before. Drift is a perfect example of that.
That's
And
a
that one,
gamepad game.
It's a gamepad game where the spacesuit helmet essentially turns it into a cockpit game.
Right.
The spacesuit is a spaceship. That's how you get comfort in there. But that one being a gamepad game, you had no interaction with the world. You used thrusters throughout.
Right.
Here,
you could grab things, but obviously you were doing that with buttons and tiny little analog sticks.
yeah, here you actually are grabbing the real world. That world, the virtual world.
Yep.
And everything that looks like you can grab, you could grab.
Yep. Whether it's a rock or a surface or some sort of a plunger pistol, you could grab it all and you could use these things.
Handles everywhere. Yeah, and you talked about pulling yourself through the world. You can even push yourself through the world.
Yeah.
And it felt completely natural. I was holding on to an object and then looking and then pushing myself away and then drifting off to a different part of that spaceship.
Yeah. At some points you have to drill through things and you activate a laser drill on your finger by hitting a virtual button on your wrist. Then you're sort of grabbing onto a surface. You're always holding on to things because otherwise you'll start floating away. And you drill out the surface and then you grab it and you throw it away. It definitely feels very natural. When I do push myself off from things and then I come to a stop, it's almost like I do need my feet a little more spread apart. Like I do feel like I'm moving through space. So it's not that I'm not sensing motion. I am, but it doesn't cause a motion sickness problem.
I'm curious how that game's going to play while sitting down, because you really don't, other than looking around and moving your hands, you don't have you don't need a sense of the rest of your body, even though they actually represent your full body in game.
They use a pretty decent IK model to, model the animation of your body as to where it would be if you were moving in that way. It's almost never where your body is, unless you've just gone straight up, because you're often floating through space and your feet are out behind you. That caused a little bit of a disconnect for me. I almost wouldn't mind if the game didn't have the model, if it would just use my hands, as a lot of the titles have done so far, just because that's what we know is safe and keeps the immersion level. How did you feel about the model in game?
Yeah, I think having the hands and arms definitely help, because like I said, as I was grabbing things, I was looking, and they do this interesting effect when you pass through walls. Because obviously, if I grab a wall and I move my hand through it, in the virtual world that wouldn't make any sense. But then they show an outline, and that outline really perfectly contoured. I think their IK model was really,
certainly
really
for
good.
the arms, yeah, definitely for the arms. And they do that. They said that they wanted to do that so that to keep the immersion level and keep the comfort level.
Yeah. I think it's also really ambitious that they're making this a heavily narrative-driven game with a protagonist that you're interacting with, that's scripted. A commander that you as a robot work in support of, and you go to her, you listen to her, and you have these real interactions.
That's true, but at the same time, it's almost like a playground. I mean, you're not forced to go through this at any kind of pace. You can just go in and chill out. You can go and drill and pick up the little pieces of Saturn, and you're on an asteroid in the Saturn asteroid belt, and you can throw them and just play around in that whole space. You can get from one rock to another by transportation or just by thrusting yourself through space. And this is a game that you could get lost in and just spend time in as a chill out.
Right. It reminds me of those open world RPGs where people just want to walk for days in the virtual world. Here you can float around for days in the virtual world. So I hope they'll have a good single player campaign. Looks promising now, but they also have a multiplayer. And in the tutorial, you got to throw around some discs. So
that looked pretty fun.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what multiplayer using that mechanic to navigate around the world, throwing discs around might be. I think that's a mechanic that can apply to much more than just a single player experience.
Well, I mean, I go straight to Discs of Tron. I mean, it certainly looks a lot of fun. I didn't play that part of the game, but I saw you throw that disc, and it looked very natural. It looked like it took up some practice to get that aim just right, and it looked like it has a lot of potential.
Yeah, whereas some games we've seen with a touch, they give you a little bit of assistance, a little bit of auto aim to make it satisfying. Here, the satisfaction really came from physics working exactly as you imagine they should work.
Which I love. I mean, that's going to create the ramp of difficulty for the game and also set players apart from one another. But it's a complete even playing field.
Yeah, so the game is Lone Echo. We hope to see a lot more of the game in the future.
Yeah.
I'm just bummed it's not a launch title. They have more to work on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good surprise. I mean, I enjoyed Adrift, but this is what I wish Adrift had been, because I wanted to reach out into that world.
Yeah, and hopefully more VR games will let us reach out into those virtual worlds. We'll have more coverage of those games in the future. From Oculus Connect 3, Jeremy and I will see you next time.